So moving on now to global issues, more than 120 world leaders are in New York this week for the annual meeting of the UN General Assembly. This is including leaders from countries that enjoy billions of dollars in aid from the U.S. Now, given the horrific events that we've seen unfold in the Middle East since 9/11, you might think the president's first priority is to meet with these leaders while they're here. But in fact, while President Obama has so far not scheduled a meeting with Israel's prime minister, he has made time to chat up the ladies on The View today. With me now to figure out what message we may be sending is Senator John Barrasso. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
There are three main things, first of all, that you think that the president needs to do when he addresses the United Nations this week. What are those?
Well, and I wrote an article in Politico about that today that specifically said the president has to acknowledge that there still is a war on terror after you see what's happened in the past couple of weeks on 9/11, with our embassy, with the loss of the life of our ambassador. That's number one. Number two, the president needs to talk about the relationship between the United States and Israel. When he says that that the United States always has their back on all issues, what does that specifically mean? And I think three, the president owes it to the people of this country to know what his foreign policy is. The president in 2008 laid out a foreign policy. He was going to hit the reset button with Russia. I believe that has failed. He said he would have negotiations with Iran. That has clearly failed. Iran is closer now to a nuclear weapon, Melissa, than ever before. He has said that the Arab world would have a much better relationship because he is the president. That's not the case when you have these sort of concerted, organized abuses going on.
Let's start with the first one, saying that the war on terror is still ongoing. Do you think that it's realistic that he would do that, given that he sort of spiked the football with the death of Osama bin Laden, saying that it was, almost over? Do you think that he's really going to go out there and acknowledge that it's still going on, even though it's obvious to the rest of us when we watch what's going on in the Middle East?
Well, I think the president owes it to the American people and the people of the world to acknowledge that it is going on, because we're saying that. I mean, you go to his national convention and he said, Osama bin Laden is dead, but Al-Qaeda, we know, is growing stronger, has a significant presence in Libya, and he ought to acknowledge that.
Why do you think he's not meeting with Bibi Netanyahu?
No, I think it's a mistake. I think that there is a rocky relationship now between the United States and Israel, probably the rockiest of the last 30 years. The president in his interview last night on 60 Minutes said he was going to ignore the noise. That's how he referred to it. He referred to the death of our ambassador as a bump in the road. I think that the president is way off base on this. I sit on the Foreign Relations Committee. We had a top secret briefing on what happened in Libya. I think they're either stonewalling, but to me it seems like there's a cover-up going on, that they don't want the American people to know what really happened there. Well, that makes you wonder what really happened. Why are they not sharing this information with the American people? This was not something that was the result of a poorly made YouTube video. This is something this was on 9/11. This was something that was pre-planned, organized. It might have been weeks or months in advance. People showed up with rocket-propelled grenades. That's not something you just show up for the demonstration.
It's almost ridiculous to tie the two things together and not realize that it had to. I mean, most of us, I think, knew immediately when we saw what day it was, what was inspiring this attack. But setting that aside for a second, what do you think about him coming to town and going on The View, going on a daytime talk show at a time when there are world leaders coming from obviously around the globe to come here and meet and try and make some sort of progress, and he's in essence campaigning?
Well, and he's been doing that now for well over a year. The economy, we know, is in shambles. We know that there are still over 8% unemployment, which has been the case now for 43 months. We have a debt of over $16 trillion, and I understand the president actually didn't even know how much debt we had as a country. So this is a time when the American people know they're not better off now than they were 4 years ago, but it seems that he wants to ignore that and talk about anything other than his record as commander-in-chief and as the person that said he'd put America back to work.
Senator, thank you so much for coming on
Melissa,
today.
thanks for having me.